Hey guys, how's it going? This is Joshua with thinkliberty.co, and today we're joined by Augustus Invictus. Augustus is a lawyer, the publisher for the Revolutionary Conservative, and he's a former candidate for the United States Senate. How you doing today, Augustus?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. It was a long day at work.
Yeah, same here.
So let me start out by asking you what it was that drew you to the liberty movement and how long you've been a part of that fight.
As far as the philosophy, my dad raised me libertarian. As far as the movement itself, I reckon I came to it by way of the Libertarian Party. My dad was always signed up with the Republican Party. We were never big into Libertarian Party politics. I was drafted to run for Congress by the Orange County Party in Florida. So that's how I came to the party. And then from there, I became familiar with all the ins and outs of the various factions and the broader movement. And so really running for Senate was what got me into the broader movement.
Oh, sorry, I think you're cutting out there. You still there?
Yeah, no, I'm still
cool,
here.
cool. Looked like you were cutting out. Perfect. So what programs and issues did you advocate for since you've joined the Liberty Movement? And what was the platform that you ran on when you were running for United States Senate?
When I ran for Senate, I started out, as I said off air, I started out more as a centrist. I'd right down the line libertarian positions. I was probably more, left on a couple things like the environment, for instance. At this point, I'm just pure vigilante about the environment. But back then, I would say the federal government has a role to play in environmental protection. It just hasn't been doing its job. Or, things like welfare programs. I'd say that should be left to the state. It's not a federal government thing. I'm running for U.S. Senate, so it's something I kind of sidestep. But down the line, all these things where you're trying to kick the can and say, well, yeah, it's, the state's position, or, it's not really a U.S. Senate function. I don't really care to talk about it. That was all fine and well out in the beginning. And then the leftists would start attacking me and my camp and everyone we were involved with. And we didn't really understand why, but it did just de facto move us all to the right, whereas we all consider ourselves centrist. When it turns out that all of us who actually liked Ron Paul are now racist, backwards reactionaries, we all found ourselves in the right wing, whether we liked it or not. So from that point, my positions became purely right-wing libertarian.
Nice. I consider myself a Rothbardian ANCAP. So you would say that you advocate for like a right-wing style libertarian minarchism, or?
Yeah, I've always considered myself more a classical liberal. Minarchism, I understand. My dad, when we were growing up, he'd always say the government has two jobs: delivering the mail and building the roads. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. I've always had a more maybe generous view of government, but still, I see government as a necessary evil. It's evil, but it is still necessary. So I'm a little, friendlier to government than your normal ANCAP, maybe.
Right. What would you say that you think the government's role should be in the individual's life?
It depends on which level of government you're talking about. I'm a constitutionalist, really, at heart. My father was a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. We both did criminal defense. So, to me, the Constitution is the foundation of our society. I do believe that federalism is a legitimate principle. So I believe in the division between the federal government and the state's government, especially since I'm a Southerner. And so states' rights are very important to me. Local government, as a libertarian, I think of things from the ground up. So local government, then state government, then federal government, if at all. So as far as what it should be, what its role should be in an individual's life, I don't think the federal government has any role whatsoever in an individual's life. I think the federal government's job is to unite the 50 states so that we fend off foreign invaders and we keep domestic strife from occurring. As far as the state's role, the 50 states, that is, in an individual's life. I do believe that states have a prerogative to protect the health, moral, and safeties of their people. Whether that's drug regulation or abortion or whatever, I think that's up to the states to decide. But I really think that local government should be the key to everything.
Nice. How do you feel about our foreign policy and foreign interventionism?
I feel very badly about it, if you mean how it is at present.
Yeah.
I've always, since day one, and I continue to this day, I support the policy of non-interventionism. The thing I'm most, far right extremist about is the Middle Eastern affairs. Our alliance with Israel, for instance. Most conservatives in my camp, they're very pro-Israel. I've never understood that. It seems to me that we keep getting involved in these wars because of Israel and our blind support for them. I think the libertarian position is you should cut off foreign aid. You should not get entangled in these foreign wars that have no direct impact on American interest. So I'm very America first in that regard. To answer the original question, I don't feel good about where we are with foreign policy presently. And if I were in charge, I'd be doing things a little different.
Nice. So you're becoming increasingly infamous around the internet with your fireside chats and your calls for insurrection towards the leftists and their kind of media machines. What do you consider a leftist, and why do you believe that they're our enemy?
Well, I have a lot of friends that are leftists, believe it or not. I know that's like a racist person saying I got a lot of black friends, but I do have a lot of leftist friends. Like, I went to college, I went to law school. Everybody's a leftist, if not an outright communist, in college and law school. And the people I grew up with, I'm still friends with. I don't consider every leftist an enemy. The people I consider enemies, existential enemies, are communists, are the people who actually follow Marx, the people who actually believe in communal property, the destruction of private property, those people who seek to undermine all of Western civilization, that is an enemy. Someone who believes that we should have Social Security benefits and, state welfare, public schools, that's not a leftist to me. That's just maybe a liberal, maybe the average American. I don't think of that as an existential enemy. The people who are the radical left, the Antifa, Black Lives Matter, the people who actually commit physical acts of violence against right-wingers, those people who smear me as a person with Hispanic kids as a white supremacist, or, everybody who wears a Donald Trump hat is a fascist. Those people are enemies because they are deliberately disingenuous to the point that it is, subversive is a kind word. It's treasonous is what it is. They pretend to care about American values while they simultaneously undermine it with everything they have. So, if you commit acts of violence against innocent people, and certainly against people in my camp, I have authorized in the past acts of violence against them in retaliation, and I will continue to do so until they calm the fuck down.
Gotcha. So you mentioned Donald Trump. How do you feel about the current administration and his policies, especially regarding the immigration ban and stuff?
As far as Trump himself, I've supported Trump since day one. Like, since the day he announced his candidacy, I love the guy. He was in Home Alone 2, made that cameo appearance. He was in American Psycho. He's Patrick Bateman's idol. Like, Donald Trump is just the pure American. I love the guy. I loved his campaign. I thought it was a great middle finger to everybody in the establishment. And when he won, I was elated that Clinton didn't win, but I was also just happy that this guy won because I love him. But, more to the point of your question, the administration, I have mixed feelings about it, to be frank. As much as I might love Donald Trump, I might love the nationalism behind his campaign. The fact is, you have to be a little suspicious of someone who brings this ultra-nationalist platform when he has a lifetime of history as an internationalist businessman. a very liberal internationalist businessman. And, when he's appointing bankers to all the heads of these positions, that causes me great suspicion, because to me, leftism being what it is, communism, et cetera, one of the real enemies of the American people is international finance, which is why I'm a nationalist, pure and simple. So some of Trump's moves, some of the administration, what the administration is doing, it rubs me the wrong way, and I look at it with a cautious eye. So as far as the Muslim immigration ban, the ban on those certain countries, I honestly don't think it's enough. To me, there is a war going on. You would not allow Japanese immigration if the Japanese were bombing California. So why we would allow immigration from countries that knowingly support terrorism or ISIS is beyond me, especially being from Orlando, because that attack at Pulse nightclub, yeah, I'm not homosexual, but my little brother is, and he has frequented that nightclub, which happens to be, by the way, half a mile from our old high school. So that was very much home turf for me. And when that happened, that's like when September 11th happened to a lot of people, where they just, something clicked, and they were all of a sudden American, red, white, and blue all over again. And that attack in Orlando was that for me. From that point forward, it was a question of existential survival. And if you care about the survival of your people, all this political correct bullshit has to go out the window.
Right. So I'm glad you bring up the word nationalism, and another word that's been thrown around at you all over the interwebs has been white nationalism, right? So how do you feel about
right.
how do you feel about those accusations, and what does nationalism mean to you as Augustus Invictus?
Yeah, well, nationalism, I would accept that accusation. If we're calling it an accusation, I just call it a label. It's to me, it's you're putting your nation first. There is nationalism and there is internationalism. Either you believe that your nation comes first, or you believe that we should all hold hands around the world, like the Who's in Whoville. I don't know how people plan to survive being that naive about human nature, but you have to take care of your family, your tribe, your nation. Outside of that, then maybe we can get along. As far as white nationalism, however, clearly my children are Puerto Rican. My kids are half Hispanic. I grew up in Hispanic neighborhoods my whole life. Like, I speak Spanish, for Christ's sake. Like, the whole notion that I'd be some Nordic, like, goose-stepping neo-Nazi is just outrageous. And I think people know that. The people making these outrageous accusations, they know these things. But they also know that the more you tell a lie, the more it becomes truth. The real truth behind it, if it were accurate at all, is that I have outright said that Europe should be for Europeans, and that immigrants from the third world have no business being in Europe. It's because I've talked about white genocide. I don't think talking about white genocide makes you a white supremacist, more than talking about the genocide in Sudan makes you a Sudanese supremacist, or the Armenian genocide, talking about that makes you an Armenian supremacist. I mean, that's just absurd. You talk about tens of millions of people coming into the West to literally with the purpose of breeding us out of our own fatherland. If you talked about that in reverse and said, well, we should send tens of millions of white people into the Congo and breed them out, I don't think these liberals would be saying the same thing at all. I think they'd say that was genocide. So, accusing me of white nationalism because I think that Europeans should have Europe is disingenuous at best, but I think leftists are disingenuous at heart. I think they know that what they're saying is absurd. So
just to expound on that point just a little bit, to you, Europeans are anyone who lives in Europe. I mean, anybody who's born in Europe, right? Or is there a race attached to that?
No, I don't think so. I think race is attached to that one. It's not America. America is very much founded on the fact that if you're born here, you're an American. If you made it here, then okay. If you're, fighting for this country, you could join the military and become a citizen in this country. That's not the case with Europe. Europe actually does have a racial quality to it, just like Africa, just like China, just like Japan. You know, I don't think any sane Japanese person would say, oh, you happen to be born on our island? Well, you know, welcome to Japan. You're fucking Japanese now. That's insane. We in America seem to think that applies to Europe because the mainstream media, the leftists, the international financiers, all these people I call existential enemies, they think that white people should be wiped out. They think that the power structure is white, and therefore white people are evil, and therefore they should be undermined. I do have a legitimate problem with that. You know, despite the fact that my kids are minorities, despite the fact that I don't personally think of myself as racist, I think it's racist that people want to wipe out white people, and they're not subtle about it either.
So when you're talking about America, do you understand that there's a bunch of different cultures in America, and you're okay with that because they're American people. They just might have a different color of skin or whatever, right? So,
in a sense, yes, but in a sense, I'm also not okay with it. I mean, I'm not saying that we should all be, you know, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, even though that's what I happen to be. Well, not the Protestant part anymore. That's how I was brought up, but you know, I'm not saying we should all go back to those original good old days of 1776, but at the same time, we have become deliberately balkanized. I mean, there has been a program in place in America, at least since the changing of the immigration laws in the 60s, to completely divide this country. You know, I know there's always this response that, well, Catholics were allowed here, Italians and Irishmen, you know, they were minorities at one point and undesirables. And yeah, okay, that's true, but they have integrated. And then the response is, well, don't you think that Muslims and Indians and everybody else in the world can integrate? And the fact is, yes, possibly they could. But when you bring tens of millions of people over who cannot possibly be assimilated in any fashion whatsoever, your goal is not assimilation. Your goal is balkanization. And there's been a deliberate program of that in place for generations now. That I do have a problem with. But no, as far as the founding mythos of our country, you know, I've always said I'm not anti-immigration. I'm just for a practical immigration policy. Whether you're right or left, I don't think anyone in their right minds in this country thinks that we have a workable immigration system. Whether you want more immigration or less, I mean, and I've always said that, you know, the greatest weapon that the left has in the immigration debate is that our system is broken, that you cannot immigrate here legally without jumping through a bunch of hoops, and without going through a broken system. So it's something that needs to be fixed no matter how you feel about it.
Nice. Yeah, so that actually leads into another question that I had was, do you think that the left has any value to some of their concerns with healthcare and the police state and inequality?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Certainly with the police state. I've ranted against the police state forever. When I first started running for Senate, my biggest issue, my prime issue was ending the drug war, because I was a criminal defense attorney. I fought the drug war every day of my life. And to me, this is big news. But when you start running for office and you talk about these things, you realize nobody gives a shit about the drug war, because, your neighbor, his brother's not going to prison for 30 years. The people you're talking to at these Libertarian County affiliates, they didn't get their door kicked in by the police, by the fucking SWAT team, and have a knee on their neck in front of their children. Like, those things don't happen to the average voter. This whole drug war doesn't really exist to them. So you start trying to wake people up to the fact that it's not about drugs. It's not about being allowed to smoke marijuana or being allowed to shoot up heroin. It's about the militarization of the police. I don't personally do drugs. I don't care for them. They're fun, but I don't do them. I have things to do. I used to be a lot friendlier to drugs, but the real question here is, like, with as much damage as drugs can do, as much damage as a drug addict can do to every person around her, the real problem here is the drug war, the militarization of the police. So as far as that's concerned, I'm 100% in agreement with the leftists about we need to demilitarize the police in this country. As far as other things like healthcare, like I said earlier, I don't think the federal government has anything to do with healthcare. I think that's a state issue. As far as the states being involved in it, I think that's good on a case-by-case basis. You know, I'm not running for governor, but I do think that some people just can't afford healthcare. There has to be a safety net. And, you know, as unpopular as that is to say with libertarians, especially the ANCAPs, some people are just not cut out for capitalism. There will always be an underclass, and that's a fact of life, whether it's fucking ancient Egypt or the reign of King Louis XIV or Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Donald Trump. Like, there will always be this underclass, and the government will always be necessary because there are some people who just cannot take care of themselves. Same with, you know, insane people in the streets that need to be put in asylums. I mean, that happens. And the libertarian response to all this is, well, everything should be privatized. We should have private charities. Private charities should do this and that. It's like, well, that would be wonderful. But the fact is, nobody's stopping private charities from doing any of this right now. So if they were going to do that, they would do it as a public service. But the fact is, private companies do things because it benefits them in some way, whether it's the prestige that goes along with looking humanitarian, or it's an actual profit that they can turn from their business. So until you figure out how to make actual humanitarian things anti-government, you know, which if you figure that one out, you're going to be the richest person in the world. Until that happens, government will be necessary. I forget your third example there, but, you know, all in all, inequality. Yeah. That also, I do believe, is a legitimate leftist protest in this country. My problem with the leftist approach to it is they think that the government should get involved in it, and I don't. This whole thing with Gary Johnson and of course Jews should have to bake cakes for Nazis, like that's insane. You know, no matter how I feel about Jews or Nazis, the federal government should not be telling people what to bake in their cakes. Same thing with employment practices, hiring and firing. Those things are not the role of federal government. So if you have a problem with that, there are ways around it, but I don't think that government intrusion is the way, and that's why I disagree with leftists on that point.
Nice. So let's go ahead and try and talk about some of the other things that have been flung at you recently online. I know that you're a big fan of poetry and you really like Ezra Pound, and you've done a couple of readings online. I think you did one on Aleister Crowley's birthday or something, 2013. And in the description of the video, you said, "My fellow fascists." And I know this is something that's been brought up to you before. I haven't heard an explanation for it, but I figure now would be as good a time as any for you to let people know what you meant and what the reasoning was behind that.
Sure. I mean, there's a long, drawn-out philosophical story behind that. Most people are not familiar with the career of Ezra Pound. So when this first became an issue, when I first started running for Senate, because someone dug up my personal YouTube channel with all the poetry, they found this one line and they hooked on it, saying, well, this guy is clearly a fascist because he said, "My fellow American fascist." And I would say, look, I'm not talking about poetry. Like, I'm running for a political office. Poetry is not a legitimate topic of discussion, and, you know, I'd just leave it alone. And they wouldn't leave it alone. So in the end, I just said, look, then call me whatever you want. You're retarded. I'm moving on with my life. You know, and the people who were not stupid would say, okay, well, clearly this is poetic. Let's move on. And the people who are stupid or who are disingenuous leftists would say, well, he's a fascist because look at this poem he recited. As far as why it was written in the first place, Ezra Pound was a poet, but he was also an intellectual. He was a scholar. He was very political. And Ezra Pound went over to Italy. He was an expat, just like many people in the post and the interim years between World Wars I and II. Many intellectuals were expats. So he was in Italy and was there when Mussolini rose to power. And he called himself a fascist. However, there is a little known book that no one knows about, and it's called Jefferson and or Mussolini. It was written by Ezra Pound, and he makes the argument that Thomas Jefferson that is, and Benito Mussolini, they had the same policies, as it turns out. They look different on the surface, and they sound different because one's, this liberal American and the other's this, ultra evil fascist. But really, when you look at it and you examine the policies of Jefferson and Mussolini, they're one and the same. His argument was that Mussolini was working to destroy this crusted upper class that had been there for 2,000 years. Some of those families, Pound points out, had been in those villas in Italy for 2,000 years. And there's this aristocratic class that Mussolini had to break apart in order to make his society more free. Jefferson, on the other hand, along with all the other founding fathers, he was working in a wilderness with a complete blank slate. And, no matter what Jefferson said, if you look at what he actually did, it was no different than what Mussolini would have done. Jefferson talks all about, the limited power of government and anarchy and revolution and so on and so forth. And then he makes the Louisiana Purchase. He does all these power plays, absolute power plays throughout his entire presidency. And Pound also points out that Jefferson ruled through what Pound called his marshals, so that Jefferson effectively ruled the United States of America for a good 50 years. And he points out, this is no different than what Mussolini would have done if Mussolini were in Jefferson's position at that time and place. So all that being said, that leads to, if you are a Jeffersonian, then you are ipso facto supporting Mussolini. So it's a very convoluted, tortured argument philosophically, but that's where it comes from,
Right. Makes sense. So you yourself are not actually a supporter of fascism?
No.
Okay.
Unless it's Jeffersonian fascism, I guess.
Oh, awesome. It sounds like it sounds like the right kind of fascism, right? We all know that you've kind of built up this character with your fireside chats, and you're becoming increasingly more followed there. Can you tell me where you've pulled the kind of your accent and the whole aura that you put out? Where have you derived that from, and what makes you want to be that person?
Believe it or not, because most people don't believe it, that's actually my real accent. If you hear me hollering because I got mad at someone, that's the accent that comes out. If I am nervous or, full of adrenaline, like that's the accent that comes out. So when I give a speech, like a formal address, that's really what I talk like. And, it's probably because I grew up in the South, but also because I lived in Chicago. I picked up a lot just learning different languages. So my accent's all over the place. Nobody can tell whether I'm trying to do a Bane impression or Foghorn Leghorn or who knows what, but I've just been around. The formal addresses are just me going and letting loose. The comparison I always give is, you see a UFC fighter go up into the octagon and he kicks the shit out of this guy. And it lasts, 3 minutes and it's over with. And then he comes back out and he's this normal, chill individual. And I don't think anybody would say, well, when you go into that octagon, you are faking it. Like you've got some kind of persona you're trying to put on everybody. I think the fighter would say in response, like, when I'm in the octagon, that's actually who I am. Like when I'm brutalizing someone, when I'm actually going to war in there, that's who I really am. And I think the same way, when I'm actually giving a speech, when I'm passionate about something, that's what really comes out. When I'm having a conversation like this, it's like, hey man, what kind of Doritos do you like? It's nothing important. It's not my persona. It's just, I can tone it down. And if I couldn't, like, imagine how far I'd get in life. If I were yelling at people with my fucking accent, they would never listen to a word I had to say if I talked like that all the time. So I've learned to, kind of come down a little bit.
Yeah, imagine Vice doesn't listen to you anymore, huh?
Vice, Vice can fuck itself. Vice came out with a hit piece on me for day one, like back in fall of 2015. And I guess they thought I forgot about that hit piece because they came at me trying to recruit me for that video series, Hate Thy Neighbor. I don't know. Maybe they thought I was some kind of media whore or something that I would just jump at the chance. But I've watched one of the episodes. Like, are you kidding me? What kind of idiot would do this? So, I've told everybody that I know, do not sign up for this. It's a hit piece series, a whole series of hit pieces on everybody in the right wing. So I told them in uncertain terms, if you come to any of these events, I will treat you no different than the Antifa.
Right. Makes sense. I actually hadn't heard the whole story behind that. I didn't realize that they had come to you to be on the Hate Thy Neighbor show.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm sure by the time it got back to you, it was, oh, Invictus put out death threats against these innocent journalists. But no, they tried to ambush me. They tried to ambush Kyle Chapman. They tried to ambush a bunch of us into this second series of Hate Thy Neighbor. So I've been telling everybody, like, this is what they're about. Watch this episode. They do not have good intentions. So, things get lost in telephone, I guess, but that's the original story.
Yeah, I don't think there's not many of us that fall on the right side of things that think Vice is worth a shit anymore. So I totally understand.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there are some good things they've done. Like they did this documentary on Wim Hof, the Iceman. I thought that was fascinating. They did this piece on like Serbian folk magic. I thought that was cool. They did this thing on like devil worship in Colombia. I thought that was cool. But their political stuff, especially here in the States, absolute total garbage.
Right. So eugenics, something that's constantly brought up to you all the time. People want to know if you support a United States instituted eugenics program. I have a feeling you don't, because you don't even support the federal government very much. So, but tell us about that. Tell us about the paper you wrote and why people won't leave you alone about it.
Sure. The paper I wrote was in law school. I was part of a project. I was a staff writer for the Healthcare Law Journal. We had to write an article. So I had written throughout college papers on the ethical necessity of implementing eugenics programs. So when I got to law school, I decided I would take that to the next level, and I'd make the legal argument for it. The thing my critics don't seem to understand when they out themselves as mentally retarded is that I never said anything about the federal government having any role in it. Like I've said throughout the program earlier when we were talking, states have the prerogative to protect their own morals, health, and safety. That would include eugenics. So I was arguing from that standpoint the entire time. The fact is that eugenics is legal in this country because the Supreme Court said it was so. And until the Supreme Court ruling in that case is overruled, eugenics still is legal. That was one half of the argument, that it is constitutional, it is legal. The other half of the argument in that paper was that we had the duty to implement it and that we should implement it. That is the part where I've changed my position. And anybody who goes to LinkedIn, to my profile, they can see the disclaimer on the paper explaining that my change of position was due to the fact that I came into the real world. Because, as an academician, as a college student, as a law student, even as a jurist, or as, I was working in a think tank at the time in Chicago, you live in this world of theories and ideas and it all, makes sense. But when you get to the real world and you realize that the people in charge of these programs, they're not noble-minded scholars. They're just normal people. They're bureaucrats. That's who runs government. There's normal-ass people going to their fucking day jobs, taking their kids to soccer practice. Like, that's who runs America. Those people cannot be in charge of something so life and death as sterilization, of people, determining whether they can or cannot have children. So I did a 180-degree turn when I came to realize that in practicing law on a day-to-day basis. And especially when I went into politics. I mean, you think law is full of, dirty, incompetent people. Like, you go into politics, that's where the scum of the earth is. So those people absolutely cannot be in charge of something like that. However, I still get flack for the eugenics thing because I've said unabashedly, and I will say this till I go to my grave, that strong people and intelligent people should breed, and weak, degenerate, unintelligent people should not have kids. Period. Like, I will believe that till the day I die, and none of your crying or whining is going to change that. It's just a fact. Just like wolves think that wolves should breed, you know, and rats are rats. That's human nature. So I still get flack about that. I refuse to be apologetic about it. But, you know, the fact is, I've already said publicly and repeatedly, I don't think government has anything to do with it. So it's really a philosophical dispute at this point. And, you know, people who are going to cry about it are going to cry about it.
Great, thank you for that. As an outward supporter of liberty and a longtime member of the Libertarian Party, do you support liberty for all individuals, no matter their race, religion, or sexual orientation?
Yes. I would say, though, I think that's kind of a loaded question. And I would also point out that nationalism, I think, is the best way to ensure that. So what we see in America, like I was talking about with balkanization, you know, you focus on this excessive, this hyper individualism, so that, you know, we all on the libertarian wing of things say, oh, well, you know, any two people banding together on an idea, that's collectivism. You know, you can't form a band of people to enact political change because that's collectivism. You can't say that your family is one unit because that's collectivism. That kind of like hyper individualism is insane, not to mention self-destructive. So yeah, I think that everybody has those rights. I lean individualist myself, you know, being a libertarian, being a Thelemite, being just an eccentric person, which I will freely admit. I lean individualist, but I also understand you have to have a collective. Like, human society cannot exist when you are nothing but individuals. And I think that nationalism is the best way to secure that. So, you know, one example I give is the Arabian Nights. If you've ever read the 1001 Nights of Scheherazade, that sort of story could never have been written in the West. It is Arabian through and through. That came about at a different time when Arabia was for Arabs and the West was for Westerners. Now you go to Egypt and there is a Taco Bell Pizza Hut combination 200 yards in front of the face of the Sphinx. Now you go to any place in Iran or Saudi Arabia or anywhere, just pick a point on the map. It all looks the same. It is all concrete and you know, sterile housing projects, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, Starbucks. That sort of homogenization of culture and that trivialization, that globalization, it has destroyed anything approximating individual liberty or culture or identity. So you have to, you know, protect your family, your tribe, your nation, if you care at all about, you know, your dignity or your liberty or anything of the sort.
So let's talk about some of your recent calls for insurrection in the media. I did read the open letter to Nick Sarwark. I thought that you know, that was probably around the time when you and I had some words online. What was that about, and how were your feelings on the current leadership of the Libertarian Party?
That was originally about the fact that Sarwark came out defending the Antifa. The Antifa, there where you are in Portland, about a year and 3 months ago now, tried to take me out. And I took great offense to that. You know, and they didn't get to me, but they did get to a couple of my supporters who they beat with a 2x4, you know, broke out their car windows. If the cops hadn't shown up, they would have gotten to me. Nick Sarwark didn't say a word about it. You know, I was running for Senate as a libertarian. National Party leadership said absolutely nothing, not a word in the press. And then a couple days later, the Antifa in Vancouver, British Columbia, got me kicked out of Canada because they accused me of being tied with neo-Nazi organizations and being a terrorist, and they threatened to riot if I were allowed to speak. They threatened me with assassination again. So they kicked me out of Canada. Not a word from Sarwark or anyone in the national leadership. A year later, those same people, the Antifa, the same people, same hood over there on the West Coast, shut down Milo with threats of violence, setting fire in the streets. They shut down the event. And Sarwark's response to that was, well, it's understandable, because he was going to read this list of illegal immigrants, which is not true. But even if it were true, the fact that he would come out and defend the very people who had assaulted libertarians physically was disgusting to me. Also, and I know that, you know, Canadians aren't exactly under Sarwark's jurisdiction here because he's the national chair here in the U.S. The people who were scheduled to show up to my event in Vancouver in British Columbia, they showed up anyway, even without me being there, because they were saying, you know, we're not going to let the Antifa win. So they showed up, and Lauren Southern got urine poured on her head, urine that was no doubt put in that bottle to be thrown at me. Sarwark had nothing to say about that. And then he defends the Antifa. That was a line you cannot uncross. Like, Antifa have been physically attacking libertarians for well over a year now, and Sarwark has never said a word about it. As fate would have it, that same month that I posted that open letter, the Antifa started attacking the Mid-Atlantic Liberty Festival, which Sarwark and I were both scheduled to speak at, and they did succeed in getting it shut down. And Sarwark had nothing to say about the Antifa threatening violence against libertarians. That sort of, it's complicity is what it is. He is 100% complicit with the Antifa. He has never said a word about their use of violence and the threat of violence against libertarians who he is supposed to represent. So that entire affair, everything he's doing, defending the Antifa and being complicit in their attacks on libertarians, to me is unacceptable and makes him unfit for leadership.
Have you seen any of the recent comments made by Arvind Vora towards Antifa and the alt-right by any chance?
No, I haven't. I saw his comments about soldiers, but not the Antifa and the alt-right.
So just recently, he suggested that libertarians reach out to Antifa and the alt-right to recruit them for the Libertarian Party. How do you feel about that? Reaching out to these people and trying to get them to follow the NAP per se.
That reaches such depths of stupidity, it's difficult for me to comment on. There's no one friendlier in the libertarian movement to the alt-right than me. I have been explicitly trying to form this bridge between the libertarian movement and the alt-right since I was running for Senate. I've said it outright. I've made no secret about it. I think they're natural allies. But that being said, the alt-right is not libertarian. They're not libertarians. They never will be. And if you try to sell them on the non-aggression principle, they will just fucking laugh at you. The alt-right despises libertarians because they use the NAP as a weapon, saying, oh, you know, my feelings, you can't say that to me. You know, they try to kick someone out of the party in the Libertarian Party of Florida because he said, you know, I don't think George Zimmerman is guilty. I think George Zimmerman had a right to do what he did. They try to kick him out of the party for that. Because of a NAP violation. They've tried to kick me out of the party so many times for NAP violations, I can't even count them anymore. So the NAP for going alt-right, that's just outrageous. As far as the Antifa, yeah, that would be funny if you could get them to sign the paper saying they swear they'll never commit violence, but I think that's a farce. Because the Antifa, their entire reason for existence is to commit acts of violence against peaceful people and, you know, the windows of Starbucks and setting trash cans on fire and things like that. But, you know, even if you could get them to sign a piece of paper, it would be an absolute farce. Their entire existence is violence. So, I mean, whether it's right or left, like, obviously I'm friendlier with the right, but even that's insane. So I think that's a terrible policy decision that I can only imagine he came up with just to dodge the heat of having trash soldiers for weeks on end.
Right. So if you could have your perfect utopian society, what would it look like?
It would look like it is right now. I'm very Nietzschean in that the real world and the apparent world are the same. You know, some people, they think, well, I was born too late. You know, I should have been born in ancient times, or I was born too early. I'd love to be born, you know, 100 years from now. Or, you know, this time that we're in right now is so boring. It's so this or that. But really, there's no better time that you could have been born in. Really, we are on a precipice of civilization as we speak. So there could be no more exciting time to be alive. So utopia to me is a world where there is conflict and there is danger and there is adventure and there is an opportunity to be wrested from those things. And if you can't find that in the world we live in today, then you'll never find it anywhere.
Sweet. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. That's all the questions I had for you. Do you have any publications or shows or anything that you want to promote coming up and let people know about?
Yeah, we've got a big event in Washington, D.C. on the 25th that, if everybody come out, I'm going to be giving a speech at the Lincoln Memorial, which is, the highlight of my political career. I'm also going to be doing a debate in New York City on the 8th, and a speech to the Queens Libertarians that same morning, and a rally in New Haven, Connecticut that day. Got a bunch of events coming up. They're all on the revolutionaryconservative.com. They're all posted to my Facebook page. So, this whole summer, just doing event after event after event. So, I'll be all over the country. So, y'all can drop in on me anytime.
Sweet. Well, thanks a lot. And thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you check us out at thinkliberty.co, and have a great night.
Thanks for having me, man.
Hold on one second.